Welcome back. The words human trafficking often conjures up images from movies, people kidnapped abroad, maybe by strangers. But in fact, it's estimated that 15,000 people are trafficked every single year right here in Canada.
And we're joined today by two guests to share their perspectives. Kayla Yama is the clinical director at Victim Services of Durham Region. And Carly Church is a human trafficking survivor who now works in collaboration with police here in Ontario to help find and support those trapped in the sex trade.
Welcome to the show. Both
Thank you for having us.
So Kayla, I think a lot of people do think that human trafficking is not a problem here in Canada. It's something that happens elsewhere. So talk about how common this is in our country.
Absolutely. It is a widely held myth that it's something that happens in other countries or that it's largely an international problem when, in fact, 93% of human trafficking happens to people who are Canadian citizens or who immigrate to Canada for reasons that have nothing to do with human trafficking. At Victim Services of Durham Region, we see, unfortunately, the ages of young people that are being trafficked getting younger and younger, with the average age being 17 years old, and the average luring age being between 12 and 15.
And majority women.
Yes, yes.
And Carly, as we mentioned, you are a survivor, and I want to start at the beginning. And so take us back to the luring stage. Who are these traffickers, and how do they do what they do?
So anybody really can be a trafficker, but what we most commonly see is something we call the Romeo pimp, where a trafficker actually promises somebody a future together. They really play on a relational aspect of it. 85% of the young people that I work with actually identify the trafficker to be their boyfriend. So it's incredibly, incredibly relational. So in that luring stage, when they first are seeking out somebody to do this to, they're looking for somebody who's vulnerable. They're looking for somebody who maybe doesn't live at home with their parents, somebody who maybe is being bullied in school, somebody who's experienced previous abuse or doesn't feel adequately loved or unconditionally cared for by their caregivers. And then they're going to start to, once they assess those vulnerabilities, they're really going to start to put feelers out. They're going to see if this individual is interested in buying what they're selling, and they do that by asking a million questions. And it does not feel like you're being interviewed, and it does not feel like you're being interrogated. It feels incredibly, incredibly special that somebody has stopped and noticed you and took the time out of their life to really get to know you. And the other thing that they do in this stage is they really start to look at every one of your basic needs that are not being met. And it quickly moves into the second stage, which is the grooming and gaming stage, where they begin to meet all of your basic needs. And you begin to feel as if you are in that full-on loving relationship, as if you have hit the jackpot. I always say in this stage, it feels as if it is the best your life has ever been. Even if your life was not that bad before, they've taken the time out of their life to really get to know you in that luring stage. And now they're giving you everything in that grooming and gaming stage.
And in many cases, this means gifts, this means above and beyond your basic needs. It's romantic in many cases. And after that phase, then comes a stage of manipulation, where the kind of rules of the relationship start to change. Can you talk about that, Carly?
Yeah, sure. So what ends up happening after you move into that coercion manipulation stage, your trafficker begins to give you all that love and affection, and then he pulls it all away. And then he gives you all that love and attention, and then he pulls it all away. So it's like you're walking on eggshells. You almost feel indebted in the relationship. You feel as if he has done so much for you. You start to think, like, what have I contributed? So you actually start to think of things you might offer in that relationship to give back. But before you can even usually do that, he starts to get you to do things. So they're going to start to stretch your boundaries, your morals, and your values. They're going to ask you to do things that maybe you're not comfortable doing. And then they're going to reward you for it. And the reward is usually, it goes back to that honeymoon stage. You get a glimpse of that grooming and gaming stage again, and then they pull everything away again. They desensitize you to certain sexual acts in this stage. They're going to prepare you for the sex trade. They are going to maybe have sex with you and shortly after take you shopping, or have sex with you and throw you $60 and say, hey, baby, that's amazing. You're so good at that. Go treat yourself. Go do something nice for yourself. Your brain actually starts to associate sex with a reward, sex with money. And then finally, he builds a wedge between you and any of your healthy supports. So you feel as if that person is the only person you can depend on. Then he has you exactly where he wants you.
And one of the reasons why people don't leave is because of this trauma bond. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so being brought through those stages, what the trafficker ends up doing is he begins to develop a trauma bond. It's really hard to explain in words, so I always tell a story. I tell this story because every young person I have ever worked with has a story similar to this. They're all different, but it really sums up that trauma bond. And mine actually took place after I took my very first trick, One of my pimps, he came into the room right after my trick left, and he sat down on the bed beside me, and he looked at me in the eyes, and it was so genuine. I can picture the moment every single time I tell this story, and for a moment it still feels just as genuine. Logically, I know it wasn't, but he sat there on the other bed and he looked at me in the eyes and he said, "Carly, I am so proud of you." And he said it because I told him way back in the luring stage that the only thing I had wanted to hear growing up is that somebody was proud of me. And now he said it. Didn't matter anymore who was proud of me or what they were proud of me for. Somebody was finally proud of me. I was finally good at something. I was going to do whatever it took to hear that over and over and over again. Because not only was he meeting all of my basic needs, he just started to begin to meet a need that I had been longing for my entire life. Was I really willing to walk out that door not knowing if I would ever get that again? Absolutely not.
Carly, you've said before that you felt guilty because on some level, you felt like you had consented to this, that you didn't see how the way the manipulation had worked and that you couldn't really consent to this. So talk about how your thoughts on this have evolved and how they evolved.
So my idea of consent when I was with these two individuals was different than it is today. So I thought consent meant yes means yes and no means no. So when they brought up the idea to me of working in the sex trade, they did so in a way that they laid it out to me as a choice. They actually gave me two options. Those were my only two options. I had to choose one, but I did choose one. So I thought it was my fault. I thought I consented to it.
Your two options were?
They said that I can either escort or I can dance. So I chose escorting. And as soon as I chose that, I realized that, I didn't have a sense of control. But it felt after I left, even after I left my trafficking situation, I lived with a lot of shame and self-blame because I thought it was my fault. I probably would have never asked for help because I thought I got myself in that situation. It was really confusing and it was incredibly difficult to understand that piece. I now know today that I didn't consent to it. Consent can never be made under pressure, and that's exactly what happened. It always has to be willing, but there was an ultimatum. If I didn't say yes to one of those, if I didn't choose one, I was fearful for my safety. I was fearful that somebody was not going to take care of me anymore. So now I know that in order for consent to be actually valid, it needs to be willing.
And Kayla, through your organization, you've worked with so many victims. How common is Carly's story?
Unfortunately, Carly's story is all too common. At Victim Services of Durham Region, our human trafficking statistics have doubled annually for the past 3 years. Wow. So that really gives a picture of the growing scope of the problem in Canada. What we see, similar to what Carly discussed, is common vulnerabilities through all survivors of human trafficking, particularly the feeling of not feeling adequately loved and supported. And one of the first things that we do with survivors of human trafficking is we really, after supporting them in meeting their basic needs, is we really explain to them the stages of exploitation so they can understand what happened to them within the context of exploitation. And we can start to deconstruct the shame that goes along with thinking that you consented to something that you in fact did not.
And Carly, today you are working with police and you are going in on sting operations. So talk about coming back into that scenario and really you're now helping people who helped you at one time.
Yeah, so I often go with police when they do these proactive operations. And the reason being is because then somebody has an option. So I'm not police, and anything that somebody says to me or if somebody wants to meet or access services through me is completely confidential. It's separate from the police. So they bring me so that if they go into a hotel room and a girl does not want to speak to police at that time, they have the option to speak to me. And I can still provide all the support and help them to meet all of their basic needs to slowly start the process and helping them exit successfully if that's what they choose to do. And actually, that's how I got out. So I got out of my trafficking situation because of an undercover police officer who came to my hotel room door and did everything right, really. And they actually introduced me to my victim services worker, who was my victim services worker at Victim Services of Durham Region. So now, like, it's been a whole 180. Now I work for Victim Services of Durham Region, and I go out and I help girls that are in the exact same situation as me.
Yes.
That's
Your organization also gives presentations at schools, and I think this is just such an interesting story, Carly, that I would love you to share, because I understand that you were speaking to some teenage boys who kind of gave you more of an empathetic view on traffickers. Can you share that?
Sure. I spoke I did a youth presentation to a group of teenage boys, and halfway through my presentation, one of the boys put his hands up and he said, "Miss, what's wrong with this? We do this." And my perspective really started to change on who he was when he was a young boy. So now I started to realize at that point that these young men and young women, when they were kids, had the exact same vulnerabilities as the people that they now are trafficking. So every time I speak about this, I now challenge people, what are we doing for young boys and young girls to teach them about consent, to teach them about healthy relationships, to teach them how to treat one another, to empower them, to provide them with more socioeconomic opportunities, so when they grow up, they don't feel as if they need to victimize somebody else in order to survive, or don't fall into being a victim themselves.
Kayla, Carly, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story.